Okay, hi, I'm Alicia. I am a second year PhD student at the MRC Cognition and Brain Sciences unit. And today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the effects of traumatic stress and inflammation on the brain. So firstly, let's think back to the last time that you experienced a bodily response to stress. You might have noticed that your heart was beating faster, that your hands were sweaty, and maybe your breathing sped up. So day to day, we experience psychological and bodily responses to pressure from our environment, whether that be when giving a talk, when slamming on your brakes, when the car in front suddenly stops, or when you feel unsafe walking down the street. Over time, the source of stress has changed in our environment, from predation and natural disasters and social conflict, but all evoke a physical fight or flight response. The fight or flight response is an automatic physiological reaction to an event that is perceived as stressful or frightening. It causes activation of the sympathetic nervous system and triggers an acute stress response that prepares the body to fight or flee. These responses are evolutionary adaptations to increase our chances of survival in threatening situations. It is designed to mobilize our body to fight an enemy, to run from an avalanche or a volcano, or freeze and hide from a predator. But even though this is evolutionarily beneficial, the overly intense, frequent, or inappropriate activation of this stress response can result in our bodily responses not returning to normal. So now let's talk a little bit more about how the body responds to stress. Two systems called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and the autonomic nervous system together produce the hormonal and neural response to stress and evoke physiological changes encompassing the fight or flight response. For example, a sharp rise in blood pressure and the reallocation of blood and glucose to the muscles prepares the body for movement. Simultaneously, hormones and neurotransmitters cause the release of inflammatory factors that prepares the body for potential infection or wounding in a non-specific manner. The combination of these responses aims to neutralize the threat and return the body to normal. However, in the context of an overly frequent stressor, our ability to resolve the fight or flight response is dampened and changes in our immune system occur. So our brain and body are separated by a wall called the blood-brain barrier. The brain was once thought of as immune privileged, meaning that no products of our immune system could enter it. But over time, we've now realized that that's not quite the case. Macrophages guard a particular group of cells in the body from invasion. When a foreign body invades the patch of cells, the macrophage attacks, but also it pumps out these inflammatory signaling proteins called cytokines into the blood. These proteins signal to other macrophages in the body to help out, and that hopefully overcomes the infection. But we now know that these signaling cytokines can transverse or cross the blood-brain barrier, entering our brains. There are also specific macrophages that guard our brain. These are called microglia, and you can imagine them as sort of immune sensors of our immune response. They are sensitive to the components of the bodily stress response, and they in turn secrete cytokines. Studies have found that both dysregulation of microglia and abnormally high levels of some cytokines are associated with a number of different mental health problems. But how? So let's take this one step further. The inflammatory cytokines, they can cause the reshaping of the structure, the connectivity, and the chemistry of several regions in the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, involved in decision-making and self-regulation skills, the amygdala, that detects threat and processes our emotions, and the hippocampus, that's involved in memory processes. These pathways might be key to the onset of mental health problems and in response to stress-triggered immune changes. The notion that inflammation is involved in mental health problems dates back to at least to the observation of increased rates of depression among patients with chronic hepatitis C when they were treated with a cytokine called interferon alpha. This original link between inflammation and depression has been supported by subsequent evidence that a subgroup of patients with major depressive disorder show elevated levels of inflammatory markers, including pro-inflammatory cytokines in the blood. But studies have also demonstrated that immune dysregulation and inflammation are associated with a wider range of psychiatric disorders beyond major depressive disorder. This includes schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, autism spectrum disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short. PTSD is a mental health problem that develops after experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event. One key symptom of PTSD is intrusive memories or flashbacks, where the individual experiences involuntary, persistent, and distressing memories of the event. Numerous studies have investigated changes in the brain using brain imaging techniques in patients with PTSD. So quite a number of studies now have shown that when presenting these participants with traumatic stimuli, there is an excessive activation of an area of the brain called the amygdala that's involved in emotion processing. In a number of other studies, increased inflammation has been linked to this enhanced brain activation to threatening stimuli. This might suggest that heightened inflammation could lead to the symptoms of PTSD. However, the problem is that the design of these studies limits our ability to determine whether PTSD is the cause or the consequence of increased inflammation. In a study that we're currently running with healthy participants, we want to investigate whether increased levels of inflammation causes changes in the way in which threatening stimuli are stored in our memory. We predict that might be one cognitive process that is altered in PTSD and leads to the flashbacks after the occurrences of a traumatic event. So in this study that I'm running, the participants will take part in a task where they see pairs of images. They then take a short break, and then they return to do a memory task. For that task, they're shown an image and they're asked to select whether they recall seeing it in the previous trial. If they select old, meaning that they've seen it before, they will then be asked to select its pair from the 4 choices below it. They will do this task twice. So they'll do it once in a normal day when they're at home, and then they're going to do it again at the Clinical Research Centre after experiencing a stress induction that we think will induce increased levels of inflammation. We predict that this stress induction will cause a disruption to the way that the images are stored in our participants' memories. So by studying these cognitive processes before and after stress, we might be able to draw some conclusions about the consequences of increased inflammation on our memory. The overall conclusion that is emerging from this area of research is that a substantial proportion of individuals with PTSD show increased inflammation. A better understanding of the causes and consequences of this could aid our understanding of the mechanisms that lead to PTSD symptoms and move us towards new avenues for treating PTSD. So before I finish, I just want to extend my thanks to everyone that supported me so far during my PhD, including Dr. James Bisbee, who's at UCL, Dr. Camilla Nord, Dr. Caitlin Hitchcock, Dr. Tim Dalgleish, and Quentin Durkorn, who are all at the MRC CBU. Thanks so much for watching.